What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the iPhone 14 Pro, which I've had for a little while now. I got this on launch day, which would have been September 16th, and it's October 22nd, so I've been using it for quite a while now, and I am ready to give you my thoughts on it. I really like this phone. I think it's pretty awesome, and I'm going to, throughout the course of this video, go through the reasons why, but of course we're going to do this how I always do it, and we're going to start out with just the general design of the phone here. Now, you may notice that this phone looks very similar to last year's iPhone 13 Pro, and really it's largely identical to that design, which I honestly don't consider a bad thing. I really like the squared edges that they introduced with the 12. I think it really does remind me of like the old iPhone 5s and stuff, which is still one of Apple's best designs if you ask me. And really the only two things that you're going to notice are, firstly, you're going to notice this gigantic camera square on the back. Now, the 13 Pros is already pretty large, but this one is even larger. And it's not like a huge difference, but it's there, and especially if you're coming from like a 12 Pro or older phone, this is going to be, could be kind of shocking to some people. Really, I don't mind the way it looks. I think it looks fine. I mean, it's not like super aesthetically pleasing, I guess, but I don't mind the way it looks. And of course, you know, I'm willing to give up a little bit of, you know, aesthetics for better camera performance, because this is my main camera for all intents and purposes. And of course, we'll get to that later in the review, but there you have it. We have a larger camera square, and then something you're also going to notice is there is no longer a SIM tray on this phone, and that is because the 14 series is the first iPhone to not have a SIM slot. They are going eSIM only from here on out. And, you know, this I feel like could be an issue for some people who swap carriers and travel internationally and stuff like that. So, you know, those people might have a hard time, but most of the carriers actually do support eSIM. And when I was going to set up this phone, when I first got it, I was actually pretty surprised at how seamless the process was for transferring my SIM information. It was pretty painless with Apple's setup tool on the phone, so it didn't take more than 5 minutes to get me going, which was really nice. I was kind of worried that I might have to bring it to a carrier store or something like that to get it activated, but that was not the case. So that is the other thing there, but largely, again, it is the same overall design as the 13s. We do have this nice space black color, they're calling it now. It's a lot darker than the space grays that we've had before, and I really like it. It actually reminds me of the slate gray on the iPhone 5, both with the color and the design of it, so I really like the way this phone looks. I think it's pretty sleek in this black color. The other colors this year I wasn't really too, you know, hyped up about. There is a purple color, but it is pretty muted and non-vibrant, which I guess is par for the course for a Pro iPhone, but I wasn't really into it. And then of course you have your white and gold, which are kind of boring colors as well. So I went with the black. I think it looks good. And I got a blue Taurus case to go with it, so I can still have my blue phone. I was kind of disappointed that they got rid of the Sierra blue and the Pacific blue from the 13 and 12 respectively, but oh well, it is what it is. I put a case on my phone anyways, but that is pretty much it for the design. Everything is otherwise largely identical, and I really like it. I hope they don't change this, because I was not a huge fan of the rounded edges. That just kind of got old after a while. So there you have it. There's the design of the phone. Alright guys, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, the display, and that was the biggest thing that drove me to get this phone this year. Finally, after 5 long years, we have no more notch. They finally got rid of it, and it has been replaced with this pill-shaped cutout at the top here, which personally, I don't know, some people may have mixed feelings about this, but I personally think this looks a hell of a lot better than that big ugly notch that we had before. Of course, they shrunk it a little bit with the 13s, but it was still super ugly if you ask me, so wasn't a big fan of it. Now we have this much smaller pill-shaped cutout at the top, which is pretty cool. Now, that would have been more than enough for me, to be honest, but instead they decided to take it quite a bit further. So not only do we have this little pill shape at the top, they've also given it a name, and they built a bunch of software around it. So this is, Apple is dubbing this the Dynamic Island, and the reason that they call it that is because not only is it resembling an island, I guess, but it has a bunch of software functionality built around it. So this little island can basically change size and shape to house system notifications and other background tasks, and so that's pretty cool. So for example here, I can flip the ringer switch. I guess that's an easy example. So if I flip the ringer, you can see it tells me it's in silent mode now, and then if I go into the clock app in here, and then we'll start a timer for 30 minutes, And if I back out of the app, you can see that now the timer status is in the dynamic island. And if you have 2 or more activities going at once, let's say you have a timer going and you're listening to some music, it'll actually split up the activities, and then you can kind of switch between them. It's pretty cool. I'm not going to play any music obviously because of copyright, but I think that's pretty cool. And this pretty much works for any system notification that you can think of. So, Face ID stuff, like I said, the ringer switch. It even works for screen recordings, which is pretty cool. So if I go ahead and start a screen recording here, you can see that it's counting down at the top of the island there. And then I can record my screen and do whatever I want. And then if I want to stop it, I just tap here and click stop. So that's pretty handy. And then it'll tell me that, of course, that it's been saved. And then it just goes away. So that's pretty handy. You used to have to go into Control Center for stuff like that. It works for, like I said, playing music and a whole bunch of other things. And with iOS 16.1, which is coming out Monday, which is 2 days from now, they will be able to have third-party apps tap into this and put their activities and stuff up there. So I really like this. I think it's a really good idea. Honestly, I think this is one of Apple's most innovative features in several years. I think they knocked it out of the park, and I'm really, really happy with how this has been done. So that is pretty awesome. So I spent quite a bit of time talking about the dynamic island, but I think that's the biggest update with this display. Other than that, other smaller updates to the display is the bezels are ever so slightly smaller this year, but you're not really going to notice that unless you have a 14 and a 13 side by side, but I guess it's a little bit nice to have. And I believe the display actually is a little bit higher resolution, but it's not something you're going to notice right away unless you have the 13 next to it, so not a huge deal. Something that is nice is that the screen brightness has actually been improved this year, so we now have 1000 nits sustained brightness, we have 1600 nits in HDR mode, and this thing can pump out 2000 nits out in outdoor conditions, so that's pretty cool. The screen is brighter. I've noticed that I've had to kind of recalibrate my daily brightness settings because I don't use auto brightness, I do it myself, but it's nice to have a brighter screen, especially for outdoor viewing and whatnot, so that's pretty cool. And then the other big update with this display actually is the always on functionality. Now, I have it disabled, but I guess I can go ahead and enable it really quick just to show you guys how it works. So if I turn it on here, you can see that when I lock the phone, it is not working. Interesting. It might be because I have the sleep focus on. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Let's try it again. Yeah, so there you go. So now we have this always on display, and of course Android phones have had this for quite a while, but now the iPhone finally has it. And you can see it's almost like the screen is like awake, so that's pretty interesting. That is a stark contrast from other phones with always-on displays, and honestly, that's the reason that I don't really care for it. I found this feature distracting. It pretty much looks like the screen is always on, and so I kept checking my phone and was like, okay, well, why is there a notification or whatever? So anyhow, I turned it off. And I really don't think that's a huge reason to get this phone. I'm not a huge fan of it personally, but it is there for people that want it, I guess. But that is about it for big updates to the display. Of course, we still have 120Hz ProMotion from last year, which was another big driver for me getting the 13, so that's still here. And honestly, this display is amazing. I absolutely love it, especially with, no more notch and all that. It's perfect. I'm really, really happy with it. So that's the scoop on the display. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about the SoC and performance stuff. Now, I guess I can start with a ramble off of the specs. So this phone now has the Apple A16 Bionic, and it has two 3.46 GHz high performance cores and four 2 GHz efficiency cores, so a slight clock speed bump compared to last year. We still have 60 gigabytes of RAM, but it is now the LPDDR5 variety, so it should be a little more power efficient and such. We have an improved GPU, and really I think the overall CPU performance for this SoC is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% better compared to the A15. Now, of course, the A15 is still in the regular iPhone 14s this year, so only the pros get this new chip, which is interesting. But we also have 50% more memory bandwidth with that LPDDR5, and Apple was mentioning some improved thermals for longer sustained performance. So, for example, when you're editing videos, I don't know who does it on their phone, but or playing games or other intensive tasks, the phone should not throttle nearly as much, which is nice. We also have a new display engine to run the dynamic island, which is a big reason why I really like this so much. The animations and fluidity of it is really well done, and we can thank the new display engine for that development. And really, honestly, this phone just feels super snappy like any new iPhone would. I mean, Apple has been ahead in the SoC game for a long time, so everything is just as you would expect it on a high-performance new phone. So there you go. We also have the new X65 Qualcomm modem, and it has additional 5G bands and improved performance and such. And I have actually noticed, it seems like my cellular performance has improved over the 13, so that's pretty cool. And then we also have a couple of new features that this modem enables. We have, first off, we have satellite communication functionality. So if you're in a situation where you have no service, you can call emergency services with that. And then also, I believe if the phone is out of range of a cell tower or whatever, you can locate it with Find My via the satellite connectivity. So that is pretty nice to have. It's not something I hope to ever actually need to use, but, you know, it is what it is. And then we also have crash detection. So basically this phone now has enough, you know, accelerometers and sensors and whatnot to detect if you've been in a car crash, and it can automatically call emergency services. I guess it uses like the accelerometer, the barometer, and a couple of other, you know, trigger points, like if you're using CarPlay or whatever, to detect if you've been in a car crash. It can actually call emergency services for you, so that's pretty interesting. I believe this has already happened, unfortunately. I think a car crashed, and like it was like a 4-person fatality or whatnot, and the iPhone called emergency services, and, you know, they showed up that way. So kind of morbid, but I guess it's cool. It's, again, another thing that I hope I never have to use, but there it is. And this is on both the 14 and the 14 Pro, so that's kind of nice. Alright, so now we got to talk about the cameras, and I'd like to start with the front. Right there you can see we have a front-facing camera, and that camera now has autofocus, which is pretty cool. The front cameras never had that before, but there you have it. And then if we move on to the rear cameras here, you can see that, of course, they are larger, but the big story really is that the primary sensor, which I believe is this one, is now a 48 megapixel sensor instead of 12, so that's pretty nice, although it takes that 48 megapixel image and it basically pixel bins it like the old HTC Ultra Pixel phones used to do, and it combines 4 pixels into one to produce a 12 megapixel image. So, you know, you're going to see better photo quality because of that, but you're not going to be pumping out 48 megapixel pictures unless you head into the, you know, RAW mode functionality, the Pro RAW shooting mode. Then it will put out 48 megapixel images. So if you're trying to take a picture of something and crop it, which is something I end up finding myself doing more often than normal, then that is nice to have. But unfortunately, in RAW mode, I'm kind of a normie, and so the iPhone doesn't do any sort of processing on the photos. And to me, I don't know, the colors and stuff just look really muted, and I'm not about to, you know, take pictures off my phone and edit them in Lightroom or whatever. I have a DSLR for that. So honestly, I don't use this mode at all. But it is there for people who want it. We now have a new 2x zoom because of this in the camera, so it essentially just takes that 48 megapixel image, and then let's put my case out there. It takes the 48 megapixel image from the sensor and it basically just crops it into the middle 12 megapixels for a 2x zoom. So that is new. And then of course we still have our, you know, ultra wide camera and our telephoto camera. So that's kind of nice, I suppose. That new 48 megapixel sensor is putting in work. The other two cameras do have some improvements as well. For example, the ultra-wide sensor itself is actually twice as large as the 13 Pro, so you're going to, you know, see more light and such with that. And we also have the photonic engine working in the background, which is essentially just like a software component. It's basically Apple's improved Deep Fusion from a couple of years ago, so that's nice. But overall, the photos from this phone are really, really nice. The biggest thing that I have noticed as an improvement is the night mode, and it's amazing. Take a look at a couple of these pictures that I took. Now, these pictures were taken out at a lake in Arizona when I was on vacation at 1:30 in the morning. It was almost pitch black. All we had was the moonlight, and you can see the amount of light that the iPhone introduced into the image. Really cool. I was really, really impressed with that. So the photos from this camera are really nice. We also have a brighter 9 LED flash on the back, so that's neat, I guess. And then we also do, of course, still have the macro mode, and it does seem to be working a little bit better. I haven't really played with it all that much, to be honest, but there you have it. And then the last, I guess, big feature that I'd like to mention for the cameras is they now have an action mode. Now, essentially, it's really just when you're taking videos out in like sunny lighting conditions, it'll basically just do a really aggressive crop on the ultra wide sensor, and that will offer some like extreme video stabilization. Now, honestly, I haven't used this at all, and I probably won't, but it is there, and from what I've seen with other people's usage cases, it does seem to work pretty good. So that's pretty much it for the cameras. I'll go ahead and throw up a couple of example photos here, other than the ones that I already showed you, just to show you that this camera is pretty baller. It's definitely an improvement over the 13, and of course if you have like a 12 or an 11 or any older phone, you're going to be pretty much blown away by the cameras on this thing. They are really, really excellent. Alright, so now I want to talk about the iOS 16 update that came out with this phone. Now, I personally am a big fan of it. They made a lot of changes for the better, I think. Now, the biggest notable change, of course, is the new lock screen. So we now have the ability to do way more customization than we used to. We now have these custom fonts, which there are 5 or 6 that you can pick from. And we now have some widgets on the lock screen here. So you can see we have my weather and what time the sun goes down, because that's really the only thing that I chose to put in there, but you can put a bunch of stuff in there. So pretty happy with the new lock screen update. That's pretty much the big story with iOS 16. But other than that, we have a new weather app, which is pretty simple, but hear me out, it's pretty cool. You can now view individual temperature and precipitation information for any given day, and I think you can even do this up to like, days in advance. So you have the whole temperature spread across the day and whatnot, and really this just gives you a ton of more information than we got with the previous weather app. So let me go ahead and turn my sleep focus back on here before I continue. So that is really nice. And then of course we also have a keyboard haptic feature. Now of course, again, this is another one of those things that Android phones have had forever, but now we have haptic feedback on the keyboard. So if I go in here and type a note, you probably not going to pick that up on the phone, but it's just a nice little subtle vibration with the Taptic engine while you're typing away, and I think it's pretty nice. Some people like it, some people don't, but I personally left it on. I think it's pretty cool. So those are pretty much the only major updates I've noticed with iOS 16. It has been a little bit buggy, although I've been on the beta. This phone is actually on the 16.1 RC right now, which is essentially the final version, but I did have some problems with it. And then, of course, before I forget, I'd like to mention that finally the battery percentage is back in the status bar. Now, you can see that it's actually also updating the icon behind it, which is pretty cool too. This was in the original version of iOS 16, but the battery icon in the back didn't actually go down with the percentage. Now, I don't know if I have a screenshot. Yeah, I don't, but the battery icon behind the number there will actually go down with the percentage. So I think it looks a lot better than it just looking full all the time. That's a 16.1 update like I mentioned, but I'm really glad to have the battery percentage back. That was one of the things that I was waiting for a really long time. Ever since the notched phones came out, you had to swipe into Control Center to see the battery life or the battery percentage, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. Speaking of battery life, let's go ahead and move on there. Now I think I can find a screenshot there. Yeah, so here we go. So that is an example, right, of the new battery icon. If my stupid camera will focus, that would be excellent. There you go. So you can see that the background of the battery icon changes there. But this is an average day for me. As you can see, I had 44% at the time, and I had 3 hours and 48 minutes of usage for that day. Now, it's probably going to be a little bit less than that just because of the way the stupid usage works on the iPhone, but not too bad. Almost 4 hours of screen on time with a little less than half left. To me, the battery life seems similar to the 13 Pro with the always-on display disabled. I personally haven't run any tests or whatever with the AOD on to see how it affects battery life, but, in my use case, if you turn it off and just use it as a normal phone, it seems very similar to the 13 Pro. And of course, if you're still on a 12 Pro or whatever, it's going to be an improvement for sure. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I can really say about this phone. I really, really love it. I think we have finally reached peak iPhone, I guess, if you want to call it that. I was waiting for the 120 hertz for a little while, which we got last year, and finally, like I said, now the notch is gone. I'm really happy about that. I really dig this new dynamic island thing they've got going, and I love the square edges and stuff. And so this phone honestly is perfect to me. I'm going to be hanging on to this one for a while. I don't think I'll be upgrading next year, but we'll see. Of course, I don't have a great track record, but bottom line, I really love this phone, and it's awesome. Now, I would say if you have a 13 Pro, it's probably worth skipping, but if you have literally any other iPhone and you want to step up to the Pro, it's a great choice. This phone's in really high demand because it's got a lot of cool features and such, and so I've been really happy with it. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I can really say about it. Like I said, love it. I'm probably going to end up keeping it, but there you have it. There is the iPhone 14 Pro review. See you guys in the next video.